let's kick it off.
What's up, Grow Nation?
Welcome back to the Grow Show.
Welcome back to the Grow Show.
Let's grow.
Well, today on the Grow Show, everybody, I'm joined by Melanie Borden, founder and CEO of the Borden Group and creator of the Human to Brand framework. She is also the author of a newly released novel, Theater of the Mind. And Melanie works with founders and executives to turn their personal brand into a real growth asset. She blends positioning, storytelling, and AI visibility strategy to help leaders build authority that actually drives opportunity for their company. Melanie, I'm so excited to have you here today joining me. And I have really been watching the way that you talk about visibility and authority lately. And I think a lot of our audience and our partners that we work with, they work with us for lead generation. But it's almost like the analogy of working out 3 to 5 times a week is that lead generation. And it doesn't work, though, if you don't eat the protein. That's my analogy I've been thinking with branding, and that a lot of our customers are a little lost sometimes on how to build their personal brand without it feeling performative or super forced. So I'm excited to get into it today with you. The first question I wanted to ask in Theater of the Mind, your book, I love it. You talk about the stories that leaders tell themselves before they even say a word publicly. I think for a lot of listeners, whether it's male or female, that inner script is running on repeat. I'm not ready yet. I don't have the authority to speak yet. Who I am is going to take up too much space. So what is actually the first move someone makes to interrupt that story?
That's a great question. And it's something that I see so much of. And most of the time, people aren't even consciously seeing that that's what they're doing. But until they have someone like myself that's sitting in front of them and is telling them, well, hold on a second. You already pushed this off 30 days. Now here we are 90 days later, and you need to wait for XYZ. You need to essentially, the first thing is, recognizing that you have a problem would be number one. And then number two is making and taking those steps to execute on what you have been called to do. A lot of times when someone comes to me, they will tell me that they have been watching me for a long time. They want me to do for them what I did for myself. And what's always interesting to me about this conversation is it always happens years after they first find me or after we've first been connected. And a lot of times people will overanalyze and overthink every single thing that they're doing because of the fact that they're afraid to execute on it. And people will even hire me, have me and my team build them strategies, and then never execute because of the fact that they aren't ready. So the only thing is really, action is really the antidote here. But for other people, what I also tell them if they're like, I can't publish it right now, is you need to go back into your archives and you need to look at the things that you've achieved. You have to look at what you've accomplished. It is not being egotistical. It is looking at proof. And it's something that I do commonly. And I have to recommend this to people pretty frequently is go look at those awards that are sitting at your desk. Open up your file cabinet and pull out those letters that you have from 20 years ago, from 15 years ago. Because a lot of times just looking at that proof, it's proof of what you have done, what you've achieved, but really action. This is the long-winded answer to your question, is action is really the way to move through it. That's what I would recommend for someone.
No, I absolutely love it. And I recognize that in myself. I followed you last year. We had a conversation and I jumped into building this B2B Lead Queen brand with Abstract last year, and it was terrifying. And there were weeks that I knew we needed to keep posting, and I remember putting it off. And so I'm personally inspired by a lot that you've said, because it is starting to make an impact and really building that persona that we're going for. But I love that this applies not just to personal branding and getting yourself out there, like that applies to people that I'm managing in a sales arena. Reminding yourself of your past experiences. It reminds me of, I always tell my SDRs to make a feel good folder. So we do a lot of shout outs internally here, and we'll post them in our teams, and people are shouting each other out and tagging them. And it's like, when you get that email, when you get that shout out, when you have something that recognizes your accomplishments, flag that and save that, because you're going to need that on a rainy day to push yourself forward. So I love in Theater of the Mind that this applies to business owners, people that are on the phones, really anything, from a confidence level to take action. So it's awesome. So when you start working with a founder or executive, what is usually broken? What are they typically getting wrong about building their visibility?
That's such a great question. A lot of times what they're getting wrong is there's a couple different use cases here, but a lot of times people get overwhelmed because they associate personal brand equals influencer. And that's not what it is. And a lot of people feel that they have to be at a certain level, or they have to have a certain number associated with content or with a following or with connections in LinkedIn's case. And so I think that's really one piece that people get really wrong. And then I think a lot of times with well intentions, this happens where people will start posting every day and they have no strategy. I just got off a call with someone where we were talking about new construction and how it's very much a great analogy to personal brand. Because if you're building a home, you meet with an architect and you drop the plans. So having a strategy is so important. And what I see fail is when people don't have a strategy, they have unrealistic expectations, right? Because their expectation might be, I need to go viral, but virality doesn't necessarily equal revenue, and it doesn't necessarily
long term.
Right, exactly. Long-term sustainability. It doesn't necessarily mean that. So that's a lot of what I see. People get burnt out. Content creation, as you know, and anyone who's listening, who has a business, who's been a part of a business, who has a marketing team. I mean, there's a reason that marketing is a profit center. I mean, there's a reason for that, because you have to have specialists that focus in this area, because just because someone has a personal brand doesn't mean they're a marketer. So a lot of times people get wound up in KPIs and numbers that are just unrealistic, and it really burns them out because they're not working towards something. They're working towards what they think they should be doing. And I would say that applies especially to those of us who have a 19 in our birth year.
The 19 in the birth. Wait, I love that. Yeah, so you burnt out and try too much, too hard, too fast. Yes. Definitely resonates.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it just wasn't what we were brought up with.
It was not. No, it's a really good point. So if someone, a business owner, you work with a ton of them, wants to turn their content into a supplementary or their own lead generation asset to start building new clientele, what are the first structural or strategic moves that you make that you mentioned?
So a couple structural things that I'll recommend to someone if they're a client, if I'm advising someone, if it's a friend, understanding, number one, who your audience is really is helpful, and having your positioning in place. So that is essentially the most important thing. I don't just work with someone and then we just start creating the content. The positioning is, and that's a big part of the strategy. The execution plan is also a part of that too. But your positioning really determines what kind of content you're going to be creating and who you're creating it for. And there's essentially 4 buckets, if you will, or pillars that I focus on with clients. And I put this in the book because it is something that, regardless of the industry, regardless of the title, it helps build trust. It helps with conversion. It helps with lead generation. But I think also when it comes to lead generation, I don't necessarily consider it to be the same category as, let's say, social media. I think that it can support it. And I do mention that in the book, where I believe that it's essential, but it's a long game, and it's something that happens over time versus the business of lead generation is generally within the month that you're living in. And this just supports those efforts when someone
Yep.
is doing the research, if they're looking for someone. So there's essentially 4 pillars that I recommend for anyone who has a business founder. I mean, this is really personal brand for me 101 is number 1, educational content, sharing your knowledge, sharing what you know, and teaching the elements of whatever it is that your audience is focused on. Because what you're doing both consciously and subconsciously to those who are reading, watching, is you're saying, I am the expert in my field.
Yep.
And I'm the one who's putting myself out there for you. And when it comes to those who are doing research on your company, if someone does a Google search or if someone goes into ChatGPT and they're searching, the goal is that those educational posts are coming up. Also, user generated content. What are people saying that work with you? Depending on what your goal is, if your goal with your content is employee acquisition or employee retention, what are your existing employees saying about you? What are, those people saying? And then you put that content out there. What are you interacting like with your employees? Do you have videos of that? Are there emails? Are there texts? All of those things are user generated, which helps when people are looking to trust. I mean, people read reviews in order to make purchases. I know I do it all the time. If I'm looking for a book, I will go into Amazon and I will look at the reviews. Or if I'm buying something for my kids, I'm reading reviews. It's really no different when you're trying to learn about who someone is. And that's why with LinkedIn, it's so great that the profiles support that with having recommendations and having a services page where people can write the reviews. Personal content is another one of the pillars that I believe is important to share. Sometimes I share photos with my kids. Sometimes I talk about how I love rescue dogs and I volunteer for a few different rescues. I share a little bit of my who I am as a person. And I want my clients to do the same, because in the world of AI that we're living in, no one knows if anything is real or if it's AI. I mean, photos, people, you have no idea. Even videos, people are wondering what is going on and what is happening. So personal content is really the way to differentiate yourself in a crowded space. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to be vulnerable and you have to share a tragedy and spin it into, this is what I learned, about B2B sales, as an example, which we all see a lot on those, the Reddit threads, we see those. But things like that, I mean, it really strongly supports, what someone is hoping to achieve by it. And lastly is promotional content. I say this all the time. If you do not ask for what you want, you will not get it. I tell my kids this. I tell my contractors this. I tell everyone who I've ever worked with, or specifically women, because a lot of times women have a hard time of asking for what we want, because we're afraid of, how is this going to make me look, or how will this appear? And a lot of times when I work with other founders, or if I'm working with a team, they don't necessarily want to promote themselves because internally they haven't caught up yet to their career. They don't see themselves as who they are. We see them that way, but they don't see themselves as this successful person who's had this very established career. So it feels uncomfortable to ask for things. It feels uncomfortable to promote yourself or cringe or whatever, but that's how things get done. And I talk about this a lot because why not? Why wouldn't you put in your comments that you want a podcast guest? Why wouldn't you put, that you're doing a series on webinars and they're free and it's educational and someone could, send somebody from their team to learn something who could be a potential client. I mean, the list goes on and on, but those essentially are the pillars that I work with and that I recommend because they just work. And then from there, you can go into any direction that you want. And, the sky's really the limit in terms of creation for it. And then it's just rinse and repeat.
First of all, I love all of the pillars. It makes total sense, but I really love the section about the personal content because I feel like that's the one that out of those 4, mostly everybody is skipping because they don't want to do the tragedy type of post, but they also feel like their customers or potential customers won't care about what they're doing as a human. And I think we've really found with me building this brand personally in the past 6 months that we want to get trust in a person first, and then that leads on to the company. So talk to me more about that. I think that the listeners will really love just why you should post at least one personal content, or how much should they post of personal content.
Yeah, I think this is great. It's something that people are afraid. No one wants to be trolled. No one wants to be ridiculed. No one wants to be made fun of. And what I will tell you is there's a fine line between personal and private. And it's subjective where you lay, in that setup. And what I mean by this is I'll use myself as the example. I'm not going to use the clients that I work with as an example. I'll use myself as an example. Just speaking from experience, when I first started posting online, it was 2020. I didn't really know what direction I was going in with my career. I was very freaked out because of what was happening. I was not laid off from my job, but I watched like 400 people I work with get laid off, and I'm seeing everything else happening across multiple industries. And I just started posting content, and I started sharing my personal perspective of my day-to-day working in marketing. So that's one personal perspective. Then I started sharing a lot about being a single mom and going through divorce and working, and also having to be in a new workplace where I had to come in, disrupt things, make a lot of changes. People were unhappy and I was falling apart. And I started posting about it because I felt that there were other people, specifically women, that would connect and relate to it.
Yeah.
They did. People would reach out to me for years and say, thank you for posting this. I had no idea. I just went through this. I remembered your posts. So I wouldn't necessarily say that posting things, and again, what I find to be personal, you might say that's private. I don't want to share that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a differentiator. But at the end of the day, no one wants to be disliked.
Yep.
And a lot of times we perform this, I call it a theater, because it really is. A lot of times it's just us thinking these things to ourselves, us being paranoid, us thinking, is this going to upset someone? Now, I will tell you that a lot of times when I'm working with a client, what I'll say to them is, there's going to be a few different types of people that come out. And I talk about this in the book because these are my unofficial KPIs that you can't find in a dashboard, right? Mm-hmm. There's no metric tracker that's going to have this information in there. But there's a few different types of people that come out when you become public online, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Instagram, whether it's TikTok. Specifically talking about LinkedIn though, because it's really the career hub platform. Number one, when you make an announcement, when you start posting, there's going to be people in your network who are going to be so supportive, and they're going to be your cheerleaders. They're going to be people who you haven't talked to in a long time, that you worked with in your last job, that you might know through your kid's soccer club. There's going to be people, and they're going to be so supportive, and they're not necessarily going to be clients, but they're going to be supportive of you, and they're going to help boost your engagement and also your confidence, because they're going to be so supportive. They're going to reach out and they're going to say, hey, how can I support you? Who can I introduce you to? Things like that. Then you're going to have people that are just going to watch. They're just going to watch what you're doing, and they're going to say to themselves, okay, when I'm ready for this person, for whatever it is, if there's a need, I'm going to reach out to them. And those are the people that will come to you and say, I've been following you on LinkedIn for a year, for 2 years. I'm ready to work with you. And this is something that is very common, that I hear all the time from clients, that they hear this. Then there's going to be the trolls. Okay. The trolls, and they're not cute. There. They're not cute. They're not like the ones with the rainbow hair and the glitter. No, they're not cute. They're not nice. A lot of times they work with you. They have worked with you in the past, or they don't even know who you are. And they're making assumptions, judgments, statements based on their own experiences in life. And so those are the ones that usually trip people up the most, is because it is something that you have to understand, that you're going to have people that are going to be your cheerleaders. You're going to have people that are going to be just neutral. And then you're going to have people that are going to have something to say and that are not going to be happy with anything. And you can't really please those people, because those people are just miserable and they're just there doing their thing and they don't believe in it. They don't believe in you. They don't believe in your mission, because a lot of times they don't believe in who they are either. And so
Yeah.
what I find, what stops people many times that I've worked with, especially teams, because now you have a dynamic of 4, 5, 6, 7 people, and or companies where you have 100, 150, 200 people that are working towards an initiative, is there might be this happening with multiple people at once. And it creates all kinds of dynamics. And sometimes it allows the culture, the environment of the company to be impacted. And I always talk about it with clients before we get started as, okay, I need to level set and let you know this is what is going to happen. We need to have a plan in place and we need to have open communication, because when this does happen, which it will, because it always does, regardless of the company, regardless of the industry, it always happens. How are we going to handle this as a team together? Because it is something that is super common and people just have their own backgrounds. They have their own ways of dealing with things. And a lot of times it's not something, going to market as a unit on a platform like LinkedIn is not something that people are prepared for, especially if they're not all on the same page.
Yeah.
It just happens, but
the team dynamics would, play a lot into it. That's super interesting.
yeah, it's something that I've seen a lot. And what I've seen happen is I've seen such immense success and goals reached from people coming together as a team. I've also seen teams unravel and break apart. I've seen people leave companies over this. And then I've also seen people say, we need to pump the brakes because this is too much. We weren't ready for this. We know you told us this was going to happen, but we had no idea that it was going to make that kind of an impact so quickly. So when you do have the personal element mixed into it, it also, not everybody is ready to share their voice.
No.
Not everybody is ready to talk about something personal. And myself, even a lot of times last year, I really battled with and I talk about it in the book. I battled with what I should be talking about on LinkedIn because everyone looks and sounds the same lately. And to me, personal content is that differentiator, your lived experiences, your personal perspective on, what you did through your career. That doesn't have to relate to, what you ate last night or the fight that you had with your partner. You don't need to talk about that stuff. You can talk about your lived personal work experiences, and it can still be personal because it's coming from you.
Love it. If we could give our listeners one thing that they could do today to build a visibility flywheel, one thing they should do immediately, what would that be?
Oh gosh, this is such a great question. One thing that they can do immediately. Okay, number one, I'm going to give you two things because I think they're both,
that's fine.
They're related.
They're connected, I'm sure.
They're totally connected. So number one is buy your name in a domain. So many people do not own their name. Buy it and make sure you own your name. Your first name, middle name, last name, first name, company, first name, industry. Buy that domain, number one. And then number two, look at your LinkedIn profile and ask yourself, if someone came on your profile, do they understand what you do, who you do it for, the results that you get? And then make sure that you download your LinkedIn profile, the PDF, upload it into ChatGPT, and ask ChatGPT for an analysis of how you can restructure your profile to show that way. And it will give you an amazing response.
I love that. That's so good. I was not expecting the domain. That's so interesting. So thank you for that for the listeners. You have already naturally talked a little bit about your story because I want to dive deeper into some more personal questions and especially for female listeners. But the idea of being too much, I know that really resonates with women, myself included, have been told that before, and that was a story that played in my head, for the past 2 years and getting myself out there last year. But I know that men feel it too, and can be quiet and don't want to be seen as putting themselves out there too much. So has anyone ever made you feel that way? And then how do you encourage your clients, your daughters, and friends around you that you're not too much?
That's such a great question. And yes, I keep hearing that video. There was a video of this woman on Instagram that I saw not too long ago, and she was saying, if I'm too much, maybe you're not enough. And I keep thinking that every time I get that question, I think that to myself. I mean, yes, have I ever been made to feel that way? I've been made to feel that way my entire life. I mean, growing up, I've been made to feel that way. I grew up in a very conservative environment where, the first time I grew up in an area of New Jersey, most people don't know this, but in New Jersey, where I grew up was about an hour north of New York City. And there was nothing. And this is before technology. So when I moved to New York City when I was 18, I was like, oh, I was totally culture shock because I just grew up in an area that was very farmy, woods, which is the area that I love today. But when I moved to New York, it was culture shock for me. But I always felt that I was different. I always felt I was unique. And I always felt that I needed to suppress that. And I felt it the most when I started becoming active on LinkedIn. And I do talk a little bit about it in my book, but I will never forget when I took one of the roles that I had previously before going off on my own. I came in to a company that went across a few different industries. It was automotive. There were 6 automotive franchises. He was a real estate developer. The CEO I worked for had about 36 commercial real estate properties. Plus, he also had a startup and he had his own media. So I kind of worked through everything and I headed up all of the marketing initiatives, events, everything. I worked with his publicist. I worked with the agency. I worked with a lot of different dynamics when I was in that role. But when I had originally come in, he had said to me, I want you to be the contact for the agency that we have. And, I started seeing things that we could have been doing better and made some changes. And of course, when you come in as a new person into a company and you're making significant changes, I dealt with a tremendous amount of pushback. And it was like that for a solid 6 months to the point where I almost quit my job because I didn't know if I could handle it. I did, and I learned to work through it. But it was the greatest experience I've ever had because it was really a lot of adversity that I had to go through in this role, and to be kind of on my own island. I mean, yes, I had the support of the CEO, but that was pretty much it. And the COO, I had the support of him as well. But it was a great experience and kind of learning. And then when I started venturing off and putting myself out there on LinkedIn in 2020, a few years later, it was interesting because the same feelings that I had coming in as a disruptor started bubbling back up again. Because what ended up happening was people would talk about me. People would make fun of me. People would say things. They would say it to my face too. They weren't just saying it behind my back, but my vendors were talking about it. I was being laughed at by vendors. No one understood what I was doing, but I just felt so strong and deep about what I was doing, which I believe has turned into my mission in life to help others do what I had originally started doing, what I just had this feeling about. But it was very difficult for me. And I really had to learn how to compartmentalize, which is something else that women were really not good at doing. Men are so much better at doing this than women. But really putting my feelings into a box in my car before I walked into the office, and to just stay in work mode and to not take anything personally. And that was a skill that I really learned how to hone that I would really recommend to anyone. And I try to work through this kind of scenario with my kids. They're tweens. dealing with things differently than, the things that adults are kind of working through. But I will say that making the investment of time into myself and choosing to be too much was a conscious decision that I made. I wasn't nearly as aware then that what would happen, that I prepare others for, just like we're talking about today. But you just have to have blind faith in yourself and just know you're not being too much. I look at it as I'm helping to serve others, to help others with whatever their mission in life is, whatever they're working on, whatever their clients are. I look at it as I'm their guide. I'm helping them through whatever phase of life that they're going through. And that's why I'm too much. They had to find me. I had to be out there. And I don't think that it's too much. I think that it's essential. I think that today in 2026, if you're in any sort of visible role in a business, whether you're on the leadership team, you want to grow yourself into the leadership team, you have to be out there. It's not an option. You have to get over it and you have to just put yourself out there. And that's really what triggered me writing the book, because I would see all of these things happening with my clients and thought, this would be a great story one day. And it ended up being one. So
Thank you.
That was a long-winded answer to your question.
No, I love your long-winded. I'm long-winded as well. I just want to say again, you were super inspiring to my journey last year. You didn't necessarily know that, but you were, and me putting myself out there and really letting go, like you said, of the I'm too much. And what I will say is the wild transformation and the confidence in myself from putting myself out there on LinkedIn and other platforms actually ended up transforming my confidence even more in my role and in my job. And, I've worked here 11 years. I know our product inside and out. I've done the marketing for it. I've run a team of enablement, and I had never sold myself. I actually just threw myself into taking pitches and selling last year because it was that speaking confidence factor, and I can get in front of someone. So it really made me confident in all areas of my work and how I showed up to work, and that I'm not too much. And this is who I am, and I can embrace it. So a really, really important message, I think, for young people growing up in a company and wanting to get to the leadership team. I love it. Okay. If your daughters Googled you in 20 years, what would you hope that they find?
Oh, by the way, they Google me all the time. Apparently, this is what they do at school with their friends.
They're already doing it.
You have to see my mom. Okay.
That's so sweet.
Thank you. Yeah. If they Googled me in 20 years, I would want them to see everything that I've helped build. I think there's a lot of what I've done that's not visible because it's through others. And so, that's again why it's so important to have other people talking on behalf of you and saying those things. But I would want them to say, that I'm obviously professional, that I have a great work ethic, but that I'm caring and that I'm kind of no nonsense. There's nothing really that I hold back on. And I am constantly talking to them all the time. I mean, every day, every single day. A lot of times I definitely feel like I am their visibility coach in many ways. When we talk about things, especially with young girls, it's the confidence. And, I see things very differently. Obviously, as we get older, I see things in a different light than when I did when I was obviously 11 and 12. But just all these lessons that you learn. I mean, there's so many lessons that I've learned that I've tried to instill within them that I would hope that in 20 years, if they're Googling me or whatever it evolves into, right? If they're just like tapping the air and they're looking for me, that they're seeing the things that I've said to them over the last 20 years.
I love it. So my takeaways today, I didn't comment on it before, but I love the being a disruptor. I wrote that down. Like, I love that, that you're not too much, and you have to keep showing up. The number one piece of advice that was connected was the buy a domain with your name in it, and then really dig through your LinkedIn profile, use ChatGPT so that you're clearly positioning your business and yourself clearly to potential customers and your followers. And the 4 pillars, and especially personal content. Those were my main takeaways today. I hope listeners will grab more and more of what you're putting out there. And speaking of that, not only was this just such a strong conversation, but I want our listeners to find you and follow you more and gain advice from you. So where can people find you and learn more about your work?
Great. Thank you so much. So you can find me on my website, which is humantobrand.com. I also own melanieborden.com, but my company website is humantobrand.com. Melanie Borden just redirects. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Melanie Borden. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle is humantobrand. I am on TikTok. My handle is also humantobrand, although I will tell you that the only reason I have followers on TikTok is because they came from LinkedIn and with Instagram too. So I'm trying to be more active on both of those, but that's where someone can find me if they're interested. And also my book is on Amazon.
I was going to say, Theater of the Mind is on Amazon. We found it. Well, thank you again so much, Melanie, for joining us today as a growth guest. I know that people internally here at our company are going to love listening to this and your advice, and then for our clients as well, and how they build a presence online. So thank you.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. This is great.